Welcome back to Everyone Has a Story, true tales from everyday life. We're so glad you are here. Was there ever an event in your life that imprinted you forever? One so horrifying that you can't forget. This is one event that burned into my memory and taught me that even incidents so horrific can give me new values to live by. Watching how my family reacted, adapted, and overcame this tragedy, this tragic accident, one about an accident that broke my dad's back, made me a different man forever. Let me tell you about a true tale from everyday life. The first sign that there was a problem was a horn beeping. It was our horn. It was familiar, but the urgency wasn't. It was midweek, and Pop had driven up north to northern Ohio, where he was working in a construction project. The whole event was so strange. The story I'm about to share with you took place in a tiny village of Buena Vista in Scioto County in southern Ohio. It was 1950, and my folks had moved back from central Ohio to their roots, to the place of their Shawnee ancestors, and to the families now living there. Our families had lived along the Ohio River at the mouth of the Blue Creek and its surroundings since it was settled, and even before. It was there that our Scot-Irish and Jewish kin met our Native American side, who themselves they'd lived in this area for millennium upon millennium. The first people were the Panjisipe Blue Creek people, a clan of the Algonquian-speaking Shawandasi. They had intermarried with the first settlers, the Barbers and the Waters family, and God only knows who else, and other lines. We were and still are old souls in an older land. Mom and Dad had moved into this little village about a stone's throw from both sets of parents. They bought a derelict old two-story house with a shed roof add-on, built in about 1850. The place had no running water nor plumbing. We had a hand-dug cistern in the back, and beyond that, a garden, and at the end of the lot was the outhouse. There was a barn and nothing much more. Primitive. It's an understatement. Now, Pop was real handy, as were most men of his era. Soon he had the place plumbed with a hand pump in the summer kitchen, and he wired the house for electricity. That meant there was one light in the ceiling in each room. 4 light bulbs in 4 rooms with drop cords to attach appliances to. And we had a party line hand-cranked wall phone. We were now modern, living big. Back to the original story. The incessant horn beeping outside, it continued, rousing us from our house and bringing the neighbors out onto their front porches. Mom was the first one out of the door, followed by all of us young'uns, kind of like chicks following a mother hen. The excitement and clamor turned instantly into dread and fear. Pop was hurt. From the stoop, we could see him slumped over on the steering wheel of the old Chevy. Sweat was pouring off of him, and Pop looked real bad. Mom ran around to the driver's side just as the neighbors from across the street came running. They helped Dad to his feet and through the wrought iron gate and up the time-worn stone steps of the house and into the house. I'd never seen my dad cry before, but I believe he was near to that point with pain. It wasn't all that hot that day, but his shirt and pants were just soaked. We helped him into the middle room, which served as our dining room kitchen and our bath. Pop had just driven near 5 hours to get home. Collapsing on the dining room chair, we unlaced his boots as Mom helped him take off his work shirt. Her mouth dropped open as she looked at her husband's chest. She shot Ramrod straight and she started to weep. "Jim, are you all right?" My dad, with an emotionless exhaustion, factly stated, "Not really, Nell. My back's broke." The smell of fresh plaster filled the house, akin to wet river mud after a flood. Like a barrel around Pop's midsection, his body cast went from his armpits down to his hip bones. It was white, and you could see the wide strips of cloth that the plaster had bonded to. He looked kind of like a wrapped mummy. It was surreal. My parents were strong country folk who had lived through World War I, the Great Depression, and World War II. But this was a time that tried their mettle. Mom set about gently cleaning him up and getting him into his pajamas. We helped him slowly move into the living room and got seated in the big easy chair. There he could see out the corner window, and it was a real diversion from the pain, I guess. The only medicine he had was a bottle of aspirin and a jug of moonshine. But between the two, he was able to barely endure the pain. I don't remember much about the story of the accident, but here are the pieces I can put together. Dad was a journeyman iron worker, and he would be booming out, meaning that he was working away from home during the week. But he came home most every weekend. He'd been in a raising gang, moving about the Midwest, erecting steel framework of buildings large and small. It paid good money, and it was worth the traveling, as work was sparse in that Appalachian foothills. The gang had finished erecting the main columns and the cross beams, making the skeleton plumb and true. That day they had been filling in the smaller structural floor joist and the miscellaneous pieces when it happened. One of the 100-pound plus junior beams the crane was swinging into place slipped from the wire cable and fell, striking my dad in the middle of his back. Vertebrae fractured. His back was broken. The crew rushed him to the hospital in the back seat of our car. There wasn't an ambulance service in the area, and when he got there, they shot him up with painkiller, and the doctor stabilized the injury, fit him with a body sock around his midsection, and then wrapped his torso with strips of plaster-soaked cloth. Soon the cast was set. The next morning, Pop drove himself home. It had to be a terrible, painful, hours-long trip. This was bad, and we had no insurance, and the hospital had only given him a few pain pills, just to hold him over till he got home. The next couple of weeks were quiet around the house. Dad needed his rest. He lived on the aspirin and country squeezing, that moonshine. It deadened the pain and allowed the healing to start. Pop was slow to move around the house. He'd listen to the radio when he could get a signal, and read pretty much most of the time whatever he could get his hands on, and every evening out of the good book. Things slowly improved, and one morning the phone rang. Mom answered. "Hey, Jim, it's for you." Dad was on the phone for a few minutes, hung up the receiver on the hook, and turned to Mom. He took her by the hand, and they walked into the bedroom. We could hear them whispering. Once I heard Mom say, But honey, you're not ready. You can't. The call was from his boss saying that he couldn't hold his job any longer. Either he had to go back to work or he'd be fired. Author's note. While editing this chapter, I became overwhelmed with emotion. I was a little 8-year-old boy sitting on a chair in the dining room, listening to my mom and dad. The pain of it all swelled up, and as if it were happening right at the moment, all over again. I share this with you because, like you, there are memories that can't fade, and they live with us forever. My tears have soon dried. This was probably when I realized that we were kind of poor folk. Later I learned that Mom was a school teacher and Dad had worked steadily, and their total income for that year was less than $1,200. The average family income in 1950 in the area was $3,300, a far cry from the $1,200. Even in those times, that was hardscrabble. We boys did a bit of hunting and fishing, and my sister gardened with Mom. My dad's parent had a small restaurant and helped out whenever they could. We never went without a meal, and we always offered visitors to come in and sit down and have a bite. Truth is, Dad had a family to feed, so he had to go back to work. I remember well the morning when Dad called my older brother into the dining room and handed him a hacksaw blade. "Be careful, son. Now start under my armpit and cut this damn thing off me." Soon the cast was on the floor, and Pop's usually tan torso was a bright pink. The plaster had sweat bleached his tan, and the near made him raw. Mom slathered his body with Aunt Cora Munn's homemade all-purpose salve. The family used that salve almost for any ailment. It always worked. No one ever knew what was in it, but it was potent. Things then turned into a whirlwind of activity as we helped Pop get dressed. Mom packed his suitcase with clothes for the week, and my big sister was busy filling a big paper poke with victuals for Dad to eat. Soon everything was in order. Like a herd of buffalo, we all followed Pop to the car. Suitcase and bag of eats on the front seat beside him. Hugs and kisses done. He gingerly slid behind the wheel. Starter grinding, and the car came alive. Neighbors had come out to send him off with a wave and good wishes. That's just how country folk were. Pop closed the door and put the car in gear, and with a wave he was off. He was in pain for several weeks, surviving mostly on aspirin and whiskey, but mostly just ignoring the pain and working through it all. That's the way my parents' generation were. Seldom frantic, mostly in control. Well, Pop healed and went on to live a fine life well into his 80s. And interestingly enough, a few years ago, I fell and broke my back. Hearkened on to the lesson learned, I'm mostly ignorant of the pain and focusing on being in control of what needs to be done. I'm not of the greatest generation, but I inherited some of their skills and their fortitude. Today, all this would seem unbearable. Each of us come from a strong stock. We've been weakened by the generally accepted thought that we'll all be taken care of by the other people. Insurance plans, government programs, and the charitable groups are all reaching out to help us in our time of need. we can dial 911 and have the police protection or the EMTs to help us transport us to the ER. Most of us live in a nation where we're well protected. But at what cost? Do we actually have what it takes to work through the pain, to do what's necessary to take care of ourselves? First answer would be yes. But thinking honestly, do you really think you're capable of taking care of yourself and your family like the greatest generation did? You know, it's time for each of us to dig deep and discover our basic survival skills and to determine what we need to learn to expand those to cover any situation. Like the apple, we haven't fallen far from the tree, but we certainly have gotten lazy, and I dare say a tad careless. Aspire to be like those in our grandparents' era. Like them, you too can be one of your own greatest generation. What stories can you recall from your folks in that generation? Do you have stories of how your family or kinfolk have had a tragedy that they overcame? If so, please share it with us in the comments below. We'd love to hear them. And thanks for giving us a thumbs up. And boop that subscribe button for more stories like these. True tales from everyday life.